In November, while driving on a highway in China, a van drove by with a large slogan on it that said, "We stand with Ukraine." Next to it was a special map of China, clearly showing the 1.5 million square kilometers of land that Russia has occupied. Just a few days later, in Moscow, a Chinese tourist had a terrible experience with blatant overcharging. A 2-kilometer ride, which should have cost 400 rubles, was charged at 5,000 rubles.
We usually take a cab from Red Square to our hotel, which is about 2 kilometers away. The app shows the ride should cost 400 rubles, but we ended up paying 5,000 rubles. Anyone who keeps talking about China-Russia friendship, I can't stand it.
The tourist handed the driver 5,000 rubles, but the driver didn't return any change and quickly left. These two incidents stirred up a huge reaction online, with netizens overwhelmingly supporting the courage of the van owner and questioning the official China-Russia friendship narrative like never before. One comment said, "An ordinary person is braver than President Xi Jinping. She doesn't even dare to speak out. Compared to him, this person is braver." Another said, "We, the ordinary people, can better protect our country's territory." These sharp comments got a lot of likes, showing the public's dissatisfaction with the government's weak stance. More people were asking, "Where can I buy that sticker? I want one too." "Real man, I salute you." As for the tourist who was overcharged in Moscow, netizens didn't express hate towards the Russian people. Instead, they mocked the tourist for being foolish and lacking courage. They said, "You deserve it for jumping into the fire pit. Is Russia a place people should be going right now?" Others said, 5,000 rubles is only about $13, not much. You're just Russia's ATM, so talking about money is tacky. Isn't China supporting Russia in the war? So you should just contribute more money. Plus, the Chinese government's aid is always delayed. The mocking tone was harsh, criticizing the official narrative of China-Russia friendship. The reality is even worse. A Chinese student who had studied in Russia for 3 years shared a painful experience.
I've been studying in Russia for nearly 3 years. At first, I liked Russia in middle school, learned Russian on my own in high school, passed a 3-month prep course, entered university, and now I'm disappointed, even disgusted by the country, its people who are arrogant and xenophobic. They say, "You Chinese people are everywhere. Why don't you go back to your own country?" One of our law professors would spread rumors and insult Chinese people during class. He said that all Chinese people are ugly and that only those who get plastic surgery look good. He even said Chinese people don't deserve to attend a university.
This kind of discrimination wasn't an isolated case. At a restaurant in Russia, Chinese customers often faced racial discrimination.
A table of Russians would tell their children, "That's a Chinese person. Chinese people always have slanted eyes. That's what Chinese people look like."
The students' experiences show just how deep the discrimination against Chinese people can go in Russia, and it's a stark contrast to the official narrative of close ties between the two countries. What's even more ironic is the difference in treatment. Chinese students in Russia have to pay 200,000 rubles in tuition every year and are stuck with the worst dorms. Meanwhile, Russian students in China not only get a 100,000 yuan subsidy every year, but also stay in the best dorms. "My son was just at a gas station. He was taken away by police and had to pay 10,000 rubles to get released. A close friend of mine was also taken by Russian traffic police. They didn't even ask her, they just took her. We were also fined in Russia for no reason." This school has been preventing Chinese students from taking showers for 4 days, and they don't even supply hot water.
Why are you in Russia? Damn Chinese. Having visited over 30 countries, Russia is the most discriminatory country towards Chinese people I've ever seen. The discrimination and prejudice are everywhere.
This hotel is so frustrating. When the staff was clearing the breakfast plates, they dropped a napkin and forced the guest to pick it up from the floor. After I picked it up, they still yelled at me. Not only is there no service, but the discrimination against Chinese people is suffocating. I never want to come back here. Netizens are now reflecting deeply on this unequal relationship. The China-Russia friendship only applies to the elites. What does it have to do with ordinary people? Even under the official strategic partnership, to Russians, Chinese people are still just an economic source of aid and a destination for oil and gas exports, not equals. They treat the Ukrainians they're fighting far better than they treat Chinese people. Did you see Xi Jinping when he went to see Putin? He was all respectful and flattering. In terms of service attitude, Ukraine is a sharp contrast to Russia. In Kiev, even if there's a language barrier, taxi services are still well regulated. If you give a tip, the driver will help with luggage. And if you give more cash than necessary, they'll typically ask you if you need change. In Ukraine, even if there's a language barrier, taxi drivers tend to avoid much conversation, but generally don't take advantage of the situation, which contrasts with the fare gouging that can sometimes occur in Moscow. There's a video online where a group of Russians were asked, during a time of war between US and China, whether they would side with the US or China. Most of the Russians chose to side with the US. Of course America, because there are more Russian immigrants there. Compared to China, I prefer America. This harsh reality completely contradicts the narrative of the Sino-Russian friendship. When the Republic of China ruled mainland China, Kuomintang leader Chiang Kai-shek spent 3 months investigating the Soviet Union and concluded, the Soviet Union is politically dictatorial, culturally incompatible with China, and its real aim is to establish a puppet government in China. This judgment still holds true for China's relationship with Russia today. Netizens' comments go even further. The relationship between Russia and China is essentially a mutual exploitation of bandits. Where is there any friendship between bandits? Let's take a deeper look at the unique characteristics of Russia as a country. From a massive Eurasian power to a neighbor that makes the world nervous, Russia's history of expansion is essentially a history of territorial conquest. This country has had an astonishing growth rate. In just 500 years, it expanded from a small principality of 2,000 square kilometers to an empire that, at its peak, covered over 22.4 million square kilometers. This means they were expanding rapidly every year, with their territory increasing dramatically, eventually reaching 10,000 times their original size. What's even more shocking is that throughout this 500-year history, Russia has never been truly defeated or occupied by any country. Even conquerors like Napoleon and Hitler ultimately failed and retreated, only for Russia to gain more land and benefits. Russia's territorial expansion can be better understood through specific historical, political, and social contexts of different periods. From Europe to Asia, from the Baltic Sea to the Pacific Ocean, Russia's expansion has never stopped. When they were blocked in Europe, they turned their attention eastward. Starting in the 17th century, China became one of their primary targets. Today's invasion of Ukraine has sparked widespread global condemnation, but for those familiar with Russian history, it was entirely predictable. This is Russia's norm, constantly finding excuses to start wars and annex neighboring territories. Putin claims to be protecting Russian-speaking areas in Ukraine, but this rhetoric has been seen many times in history. Interestingly, Russia itself is the country that has applied 4 times to join NATO over the past 30 years, yet it is now waging war under the pretext that Ukraine might join NATO. While Russia excels in expansion, it is less skilled at economic development. This explains why Putin's invasion of Ukraine has garnered so much domestic support. The incidence of taxi scams in Moscow, compared to Russia's historical actions toward China, may seem trivial. However, these incidents appear to be more than isolated cases. They reflect deeply rooted behavioral patterns that have evolved through historical developments and reveal persistent issues in how power dynamics manifest in daily interactions. The incident of Moscow street scams is not the behavior of a few individuals, but a deeply rooted cultural phenomenon, a natural consequence of historical accumulation. It's worth noting that this is happening while Russia still needs China's support, yet Russians still harbor arrogance and prejudice toward the Chinese. If we were to go back to the powerful Soviet era, the situation would likely be even worse. Russia's attitude toward the Chinese is a microcosm of its foreign stance for hundreds of years. In their eyes, neighboring countries are not equal partners, but opportunities for exploitation. This attitude has been carried over from Tsarist Russia, through the Soviet Union, and into today's Putin era. Therefore, both European countries and Asian neighbors harbor deep distrust toward Russia. Given the country's history of expanding its territory by vast amounts over just a few decades, it's understandable that many remain cautious. This also explains why the world reacted so strongly when Russia invaded Ukraine. Russia's aggression is not a choice but an instinct. It's not an accident but the norm. So when Putin once again brandishes the nuclear threat, the world's reactions are particularly firm. Because everyone understands, with habitual offenders, the most important thing is to have a clear understanding and a firm stance. Otherwise, history will inevitably repeat itself. As a historian once wrote, to predict Russia's future, just look at its past. And now we are watching an ironically dramatic international play unfold. As soon as news spread that Trump might return to the White House, Russia immediately revealed its other face. In a recent interview, Putin praised Trump endlessly. He called him a real man, a true man, and that Trump had the courage to stand up even in the face of bullets, showing his true character. Putin lamented, "In this era, there are too few brave people." Interestingly, in this heartfelt praise, Putin seems to have completely forgotten his good friend Xi Jinping, with whom he once shared a brotherly bond. Putin has skillfully leveraged the Chinese Communist Party's concerns and strategic priorities to his advantage. After securing substantial economic and diplomatic support, he has now turned around and appears poised to strengthen ties with the U.S. Meanwhile, the Chinese Communist Party's performance is equally spectacular. The once aggressive wolf warrior diplomacy has suddenly turned into a lick-spittle diplomacy. China's ambassador to the U.S., Xie Feng, once said, "We must protect China-U.S. relations as we protect our mother river," and painstakingly tried to tie the Yangtze River and the Mississippi River together, claiming that these two rivers witness the economic development and social progress of both countries and nourish the children of both nations. This sudden show of friendliness stands in stark contrast to the previous belligerence. What's even more ironic is that, in an attempt to escape the dollar's hegemony, the Chinese Communist Party has been promoting the BRICS Summit, hoping to establish a new international settlement system. However, Putin insists that Russia must stay close to the dollar. This raises questions about the value of the resources Xi Jinping has invested in the relationship. What is presented as a strategic partnership appears instead to be a complex political situation, with the Chinese Communist Party seemingly caught in a challenging position. So, the next chapter in this drama is almost predictable. Putin will likely seek to improve relations with the U.S., and the U.S. will focus all its energy on confronting the Chinese Communist Party. This is the consensus of the new generation of American politicians, with even Trump's vice president, the 40-year-old J.D. Vance, clearly stating that the CCP is America's biggest opponent. Putin has clearly sensed this shift, so he is already starting to adjust his stance in advance. It's impossible not to say that the Chinese Communist Party really has lost everything. After pouring vast amounts of money into nurturing Russia, they've now been sold out in return. Even worse, this diplomatic failure is making Chinese people lose face on the international stage. Just as ordinary Chinese people begin to awaken and question the official narrative of the Sino-Russian friendship, Putin suddenly throws three major bombs. The first one is enough to embarrass Beijing. In September, Putin suddenly declared that he was completely unaware of the special military operation in Ukraine, claiming that he had been deceived by his subordinates. He emphasized that what he originally proposed was only a special military exercise, intended merely for tactical exchanges with Ukraine, with no intention to escalate. This statement is clearly an attempt to create an exit for himself and subtly push the responsibility onto Chinese President Xi. A Russian opposition party member suddenly publicly called on Putin to cut his losses and step down. Such bold remarks, unheard of in Russian politics, were likely made with Putin's tacit approval. What does that mean? Putin may be preparing to end the war and step down with dignity. But for the CCP, this means their biggest ally is about to change course. Next, Russia launched a bombshell report about shared values. The report emphasized that Russia is an Eastern Orthodox country, a European country, and a nation that aspires to freedom and democracy. What's even more humiliating for Beijing is that Russia also published a list of 47 countries with shared values, which includes the US, Japan, South Korea, and even Taiwan. But the list conspicuously omits mainland China. Citizens of these countries are entitled to simplified visa procedures, with no language test or financial declaration required. This series of moves caused an uproar in Beijing. It's said that the CCP's top leaders, elders, and military officials were extremely dissatisfied. It is said that the military even called for an emergency Politburo meeting to discuss Sino-Russian relations and demanded that Xi Jinping explain the situation. Xi Jinping's diplomatic strategy has often seemed like a mix of confronting the West while showing deference to Putin. Yet it appears that this close relationship with Putin has been less than reciprocal. Rather than a serious ally, the Chinese Communist Party now seems to be viewed as a little more than a wealthy and easily manipulated partner. This shift has left some senior CCP officials frustrated, with even a few suggesting that Xi Jinping should consider stepping down while his health remains a concern. This situation underscores a long-standing principle in international politics: there are no permanent allies, only permanent interests. Putin, often described as the polar bear, is showing through his actions that he is willing to shift allegiances for his own advantage, even if it means betraying his so-called most loyal ally. In this unfolding dynamic, the Chinese Communist Party appears to be playing a role it may be reluctant to acknowledge, that of a wealthy, vulnerable partner easily manipulated for political gain.